Hi there, Logic Language Learners. So this is, I love a video when somebody sends me a message and they ask a question and I just think, fine, great, happy to give you a video to help you out. So this video is from the very courteous and polite, well, B-A-J-A-J, so Bajaj. I'm sorry if I'm not getting your name correct. Anyway, so he sent a message and he calls me respected sir and things like that, which makes me feel very old, but is very, very courteous. And he sent me this question about the use of whether or not a verb requires a to or not in French, and in other words, whether or not it's direct. So where's it gone? It would have been a good idea, Luke, to sort that out before starting recording the video. But basically what he's asking is there a little knack, a little trick over whether or not you can work out that something is direct or not? Is there a way of memorizing that? Is there a way of knowing that without just going into memorizing this one's direct, this one's indirect, etc., etc., etc.? I'll find it in a second. So the point is, sorry Bajaj, I can't find your actual. Yes, here it is. Da, 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 da. So in the case of verbs like pardonner, we have pardonner quelque chose à quelqu'un. So I just want to know, Luke, if there is a way to determine with absolute certainty. Nothing in life comes with certainty. The only thing in life you can be completely certain of, the only thing in life you can control is how you react to a certain situation. Everything else is ephemeral. Okay, so can we say that all prepositional verbs... Is there a surefire method, or do you just have to learn the list? Right, so let me tell you what I think works for most people as a method of learning and remembering whether or not the verb has got a. So what we are talking about, guys, who are watching this video, is when you use direct and indirect pronouns. If you don't understand what that means, please see the link underneath, because otherwise this video is just one too high for the moment. Watch that video and then come and join this. Can I also remind you that this is completely covered to a degree? Completely covered to a degree, does that make sense? It's completely covered, but in a more of a straightforward way, in the grammar podcasts. And I will also pop those, the link to those underneath. But what Bajaj is saying is there a way that we can work out which verbs are going to need a to? Okay? So, here's some really useful checklists, and let me know if this is useful for you guys. Point number one, do not obsess about whether or not there is a to in English. So for example, I speak to him, I tell him, is the same verb in French. Both of those are going to be dire. One has a to, one doesn't. So some verbs have a built-in to. So I listen to him, je l'écoute, rather than je lui écoute kind of thing. So again, if you don't understand why we're using direct and indirect, please have a little look at the video underneath. So I always say this, if your verb in English uses to, so talk to someone, give to someone, write to someone. I know some Americans say I write him, but it's generally to write to someone. Then the chances are 95% of the time, yes, in French, you're also going to use the word to. You're also going to need to use, écrire à quelqu'un, parler à quelqu'un, etc. Please be aware, so that's point number one. So if you use to in English, 95% of the time, it will be the same in French. Point number two, there are plenty of phrases in English that do not use the to, but you do need the to in French. So for example, I tell him in French is I to him tell. Yeah, it's to him, je lui dis. I allow him to speak, je lui permets. Yeah, not je le permets. So point number two is, if there is a to in English, likelihood there is in French. If there isn't a to in English, no guarantee that there isn't in French. In fact, really, it's nothing to do with it. So point number three would be a little bit to do with point number two, would be why is there no guarantee in English? Because, well, the fact is in English we change the word order. So I give her a rose. I give the rose to her. We only need to rearrange the sentence very easily and quickly, and we can straight away tell that one of those is going to be an indirect verb, an indirect usage of the object. You know, I give the rose to her. But in the other one, you know, I give her the rose. It sounds identical to I see her, which would be je la vois, not je lui. So this brings me on to my method of how a little trick. So sorry, this is 5 minutes in for the trick, but I needed to explain what we were doing. This is the little trick that we use to basically remind ourselves whether or not a verb takes two. Okay? My final side note before getting going is, where do you need to know this? You need to know this if you are using any pronoun which is not me, te, nous, and vous. So in other words, if you're using the third people, you need to know whether you're using le or les versus lui and leur. And you also need to know this if you're using the verb with a name or a noun. So for example, I told the boy, j'ai dit au garçon, to the boy, versus, you know, I said something to Luc, j'ai dit quelque chose à Luc. So you're going to need to know this in all situations, unless you've got a pronoun which is me, te, nous, and vous. Everything else you're going to need to know whether or not there's a two in there. So off we go. Here's the trick. Here's the tip. Sorry it took so long to get there, but we need to explain. So the tip is this. Can you use, Bajaj, can you use the same verb when you add a thing, not a person? So for example, Bajaj is like, well, how do I know that pardonner somebody is two? Yeah? How do I know that? Because he's like, oh, well, I pardoned him. You know, they pardoned him. You know, they let him off. And I'm like, could you say in a sentence, they pardoned the crime? Yes. Could you say in a sentence, they allowed drinking in the house? Yes. Could you say they showed the photographs? Yes. Could you say they said the question, or they asked the question? You could. In other words, all of these verbs you can use and then add a thing which is not a person. Now obviously you listen to how all of these verbs can also be said with a person. They pardoned him. They showed him. They asked him. They allowed him. So when it comes to the learner, you don't know whether you're using direct or indirect. And my trick is, if you can say a sentence and add an object to it, that doesn't mean to say you have to have the object in your sentence, but you could, then any relationship involving the person is going to be indirect. For example, if you say, I tell him, you might be tempted to say, right, I tell, je dis, him, you know, le, je le dis. No. Can you imagine, you might not say it every time, but can you imagine saying, I tell him the joke? I tell him the story. I tell him what happened. Yeah, all of those are things. You know? So because you've now got a thing, that is the direct object. That verb is most directly doing those things. Yeah, the verb is telling the story. The verb is showing the photograph. The verb is allowing the drinking. So if you say, I allow him to drink, or I show him the photographs, or I tell him the story, automatically your person, or I pardon him the crime, you know, I pardon him for the crime, automatically your verb, your pronoun for the person will be indirect. Yeah? Je lui dis whatever I tell him. Yeah? Ce qui s'est passé, what happened. Je lui montre la photo, I show him the photograph. Je lui permets de boire, I allow him to drink. All right? So this, Bajaj, is basically what's going to, as a rough But very, 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 very efficient rule of thumb. This is the thing. So think to yourself, can you do the same verb, adding in a non-person, and when you use the person, that means that's going to be indirect. So in other words, I allow the boy to speak is now going to have to be je permets à le garçon, because I allow the boy, I allow the drinking. You know, je permets à le garçon, which would become je permets au garçon. Or if you said I show the women the photographs, you can show photographs. So that's the direct. So in other words, if you're showing women, you're going to have to make it je montre les photos aux femmes, to the women. Yeah. I tell Claire the story. I tell Claire what happened. You know, je dis ce qui s'est. I told Claire what happened. J'ai dit à Claire ce qui s'est passé. So in other words, it's really, really important to see whether or not you can find an object that will work with the verb. And if you can, your person most of the time will be indirect. All right. So for example, if you say I help him to do something, you're not helping the lifting, you're not helping the moving, you're not helping the painting, you're helping him with the moving. Yeah, you can't add an object there, you can't add a thing. So that's going to be aider quelqu'un, not aider à quelqu'un. You know, if you say I see Luke, you're seeing Luke, you're not seeing Luke the story or seeing Luke the photograph, you're just seeing Luke. Yeah. So I hope this little tip is useful. Do please let me know, and I will speak to you very soon.